we looked at a lot of things last week. Hope you can recall some of them. And what we want to do, actually, make sure we're functioning here tonight. What I want to do is kind of like wrap up where we were at last week. We talked a lot about translations, our English Bibles. We talked about different translations, and I gave you some of my recommendations. And again, those are my recommendations that I thought were good Bibles to use in your study. We looked at a lot of different things like that. And if you want to go back to last week's class, it's online. You can go ahead and view that. But this is I guess we'll call it like a summary statement that I think kind of wraps up some of the things we were talking about. And this is important. I hope this came across, that there isn't one perfect Bible translation. We need to understand that going forward from here. Every translation has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. Each brings something unique to the table. The best practice, if you don't plan on learning Greek and Hebrew, and I don't know if anyone in this class is planning on that, is to read several different translations and to be aware of what each one is trying to achieve. And I hope that's what came across in my summary last week, is that we have multiple translations out there, and they're all good in their own respect. You just have to be wise as to which one you're reading for study, which one you're reading for your devotions, things like that. And it's something, and I'll emphasize it again, that you need to have more than one translation of the Bible. You really do. The more the merrier is probably a good phrase that I've come to live by when it comes to buying Bibles. And those last two that we looked at last week that are just coming, the NASB 2020 just came out, and the Legacy Standard Bible, I think it's called, isn't even out yet. That's coming out at the end of the year. I'll probably wind up having both of those translations just for comparison or references. So no questions, comments. Let's go ahead and move on then. This is where I want to go tonight, and this is a lot of information to try and cover in, what do I got, about 45 minutes. So just if there's questions, comments, go ahead and bring them up. We'll try and get them answered. Those folks that are online, you can go ahead and text Jeremy. Is that part of the link, or that's okay? If you have a question or comment, go ahead and text it to Jeremy. He'll pass it on to me so we can get in here. But we want to look at three things tonight. We want to look at what's called the Septuagint version of the Old Testament. That's the Greek version of the Old Testament. We're going to look at what's known as the Masoretic Text, and we're also going to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? That is a lot of information. And I do have a pamphlet that we're going to be giving everyone that's here tonight on the Dead Sea Scrolls. When we get to the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'll pass this out. This is really nice. It's all in color. That's why I'm holding off to giving it to you, because you're not gonna want to take your eyes off of this and listen to me. Not that that makes any sense, but anyways, we're going to give this out to you a little bit later. So a lot of what we can't cover will be in this little pamphlet. And again, it's an overview. It's an overview. Let's talk about the Septuagint. Do we know what the Septuagint is? That's a question, by the way. Do you know what the Septuagint is?
Got something to do with 7?
That's something to do with a 7.
70.
70, yeah, it's a 70. What is this Septuagint? Or it's also called the LXX, which does mean 70, which does mean, by the way, I've heard it pronounced Septuagint and Septuagint. So, depending on what coast you come from, it doesn't matter to me how you pronounce it. Use LXX and you can't go wrong, okay? Um, uh, Again, this is just some brief facts about the Septuagint. I think it's important. We have spent pretty much the entire time we've been together for this part 2 talking about the New Testament text, talking about the Greek translation into English and that. So we've been in the New Testament for the last over 2.5 months or however long we've been going now. Tonight is strictly on the Old Testament. This is going to deal with the Old Testament. But what is the Septuagint? Some of this is in the handout that you've already been given a few weeks back. But here's some facts about the Septuagint. Okay? It's commonly called the Septuagint version or the LXX. That's the Latin for 70. Okay? Because and here's the tradition. According to tradition, it had 72 translators. It had 72 translators. It is the first translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. So what those 72 scribes did, those Hebrew scholars, is they gathered together and they took the Hebrew text and translated it into into Greek. Okay, the date you can see up on the screen, about the 3rd century BC. Ptolemy II of Egypt, from what I can read, is the one that was responsible for trying to get the Septuagint into trying to get the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. It was translated in Alexandria, Egypt. That's where it was done. And again, this is tradition. It says it was done in 72 days. Okay, that's a lot of translating. Okay, by 72 individuals. I don't care how good they are.
Was Ptolemy a pharaoh?
No, actually, he was a. This is after the Alexander's kingdom is divided, and the Ptolemies are the ones that ruled Egypt. Okay, so I think he was Greek. Everybody's shaking their head that knows more than I do about this. So yeah, he was Greek. Okay. A little bit more. Since the Greek was the official language of Egypt, Syria, and the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, the LXX translation made the Hebrew scriptures available. And this is important to both the Jews who no longer spoke Hebrew, okay, because they were living in Egypt, okay, and to the entire Greek-speaking world. Okay, now think about that. I mentioned his name. Let me go back, a little bit here. When Alexander conquered the world, and I think we've talked about him from time to time in this class or in other classes that I've taught. When Alexander conquered the world, he wanted to Hellenize, okay, or we would say he wanted to Greekify the known world. He wanted to turn the known world into Greece, and so the language, the predominant language became Greek. Okay, now this is 300 years before the birth of Christ. So there's a long time for Greek to become not only the language of the world, but the language of everyone. Okay? Everyone that was anyone was speaking Greek. The Hebrews that lived in Egypt at this time only spoke Greek. They didn't know Hebrew. And so that's kind of neat that the Septuagint kind of gave them their scriptures in a language that they could finally understand. Okay. Now I'm sure there were rabbis and things like that in Egypt that knew the knew the Hebrew, but that's one thing that the Septuagint did. It became the basis for anyone in the known world, because the language of the world had become Greek. That now they could read the Hebrew scriptures in a language that they could understand. Up until this time, the Hebrew Bible was just that. It was the Hebrew Bible. Only those that knew Hebrew could understand it, could read it. And so the Septuagint was a great benefit to the world at this time. And again, you have to see God's hand in this. Okay, you have to see God's hand in this. The last bullet on the screen is important. Okay, the Septuagint was later to become the standard Bible of the Greek-speaking early church and frequently quoted in New Testament passages. In other words, keep in mind the book of Acts. Okay, the book of Acts, when the apostles went out, who did they go to first? That's a question.
Synagogues.
They went to the synagogue. They went to the Jews. And basically they got thrown out of the synagogues, right? Who did they go to next? They went to the Gentiles. What language were the Gentiles speaking? They were speaking Greek. So when Paul quotes the Old Testament, he's quoting it in Greek. What Greek is he using? He's using the Greek of the Septuagint. He's using the Greek as a Septuagint. That's important to keep in mind. The early church, the Old Testament of the early church is the Septuagint. Okay? Because the majority of the early church is made up of Gentiles. So the Gentiles now could read and understand the Old Testament because it was given to them now in a language that was their own. Okay? Yes, sir.
How did the Maccabean rebellion among the Hebrews affect this, because they completely rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greeks in the Palestine?
Yeah, that's a good question. When the Maccabee rebellion took place, they went back to Hebrew. That only lasted for a century or less, because who comes into power now? Rome. What language is Rome speaking?
Latin.
They're speaking Latin, but the primary language is Greek. Latin is going to become the de facto language as the Roman Empire continues to grow through the 100s and the 200s. And as we've already learned, Latin is the de facto language of Rome. By the time the Latin Vulgate comes in. Now that's 400 AD. We're talking BC here. Okay, we're talking BC here. So Greek becomes the known language when the Maccabees rebel, and you can look up the Maccabee rebellion. They basically take Israel back from the Greeks that were leading or ruling in Israel at this time. They take it back. Hebrew becomes the language. They were forbidden to speak Hebrew under the Ptolemies, or I forget the other.
Antiochus Epiphanes is from Syria and came down there.
He wiped. Yeah.
He tried to wipe out the Jewish people.
Yeah. He forbid them speaking Hebrew. So when the Maccabees come along and they kick them out, the language Hebrew comes back into play. But that only lasts a while, because the Romans are now going to come into play. This is history, okay? They're going to come in and they're going to, now we go back to Greek, and eventually it'll be Latin, but Greek is the primary language of the Mediterranean basin at this time. Yeah, Leon.
Just my curiosity is, how did they convert to Greek or to Latin? Was it tied to commerce? I mean, everybody had to either trade or make a living somewhere.
Right. Well, Greek is the trade language. It's the language of the street. Okay, it's the language of commerce. Okay, but Latin is going to come into play, and I don't want to get too far away from where I need to be to kind of wrap up tonight, but Latin's down the road. Okay, if you remember at the crucifixion, what are the languages of the sign that goes above Christ? Latin, Hebrew and Greek or Aramaic. Yeah, I mean that's so it's in multiple languages that he's the king of the Jews. Okay, so Latin was still being was in play, but Greek is the commerce language. Okay? If you were going to do any business, it was usually in Greek. Latin's a little bit down the road as far as taking over. Greek goes to the sideline then. Okay, this is just a little bit. Like I said, this is just we're in the 747 view tonight. Okay, we're looking at this from way up here, and I'm just looking at just some facts concerning this. It's important. The Septuagint, and I hate to kind of like rush through this, but I want to move us along. Okay. Any other questions on the Septuagint? Good. Let's move on to the Masoretic Text. The Masoretic Text. This is probably one that you don't really know much about unless you've done some study in this area. But you're going to be surprised when we kind of wrap this portion up, how important the Masoretic Text is. Okay. The Masoretes, who are they? Okay, follow along with me. They're a group of Jewish scholars responsible for the transmission of the Hebrew Bible during the medieval period. What's the medieval period? Approximately 500 AD to about 1000 AD is the medieval period. Okay, during that time period, the Masoretes are the ones that are transmitting the Hebrew Bible. And look what they've done. The task of the Masorete scribe was to receive the text passed on to them by former scribes and preserve the standardized text for future generations. So understand, these are scribes. And what they were responsible for was to copy the Hebrew text and to pass it along to generations, to standardize it. That third bullet is extremely important. Okay, in order to protect the traditional reading of the Hebrew text, the Masoretes developed what's called a vowel pointing system. Text prior to the Masoretic text used only consonants. Okay, now you may have heard this before, maybe you haven't. Hebrew is only consonants. Okay, think of your name. Okay, your name, your own name. Okay, how would you spell your name to yourself? How would you spell your name without the vowels? Okay, my name Paul. If I leave the vowels out, it's PL. That's it. Okay, kind of hard to understand what we're talking about. Think of the same thing with your own name. If you take the vowels out of your name, okay, or any word, it doesn't make much sense. Hebrew made sense to those that understood Hebrew, okay? But what the Masoretes did is they came along and they did not add to the Hebrew text, but what they did is they came up with a system where they accented, I guess we could call it that, the Hebrew letters. Okay, you've probably all seen the Hebrew. It looks weird, doesn't it? And it's read right to left is how you read Hebrew. Okay, but they came up with a system where they were, and I think I'll have a slide a little bit later that'll show you a little bit more, where there are marks and indicators and little dots and things like that are accent and vowel pointing, what's called vowel pointing. So that now the vowels could be added into the Hebrew that made it more understandable to those that could read Hebrew or were just learning how to read Hebrew. Okay, this is something that's beyond. Well, first of all, it's beyond the scope that I want to get into and beyond the scope of our class tonight. Okay, but just keep that in mind. Yes.
Are they the ones then that created, like Samuel was one book and then it became two books because it got so long after the vowels that were inserted?
Actually, let me do this. You folks that are online, don't go crazy. I'm just blacking the screen for a moment so I can answer the question. The the historical books, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, were all one book. Okay, you have to go back to the Septuagint. That's a good question. Okay, it was the Septuagint that caused Samuel to be divided into First Samuel and Second Samuel. Why? Because Greek is an accented language. It has all the vowels and everything in it. And once they wrote out the Septuagint, there's the scrolls would have been this big. There's no way they could have carried, they were useless as far as transporting them. So then that's why they divided First and Second Kings, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Chronicles were divided into two books, because when it went from Hebrew into Greek in the Septuagint, okay, the books got too long because of the vowels. Okay. Now we have the Hebrew Bible. Put this back on so people don't freak out. Okay. Now we have the Hebrew Bible that's being maintained by the Masoretes. Okay. And you can see, follow along with me. Okay. The Masoretic Text appears to have developed from a consonantal text, meaning words with consonants only, that were likely fixed around the 2nd century AD. What that means, that first bullet only, okay, is that by the 2nd century, okay, AD, the text was fixed. The text was fixed, and it stayed that way until the Masoretes came along. The Masoretic system of accents and notations was likely established in the 9th or 10th century, so 700 years go by, okay? As a result of the centuries of close and careful development and practice. We have to, I don't even know if we can get our head around this, okay? Is that they had to copy those books letter by letter by letter, okay? And up until the Masoretes came along and added the vowel pointing in it, it was hard to understand. But now the Masoretes do this, and that last bullet there, today the Masoretic text usually refers to the best text represented in what's known as the Leningrad Codex. That's around 1008 AD. That's when that came into play. That's the base for what's known as the VHS, okay? The Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartium, okay? That is New American Standard. I don't care what translation you have. You look in your prefix of your Bible, you're going to see either Masoretic Text, Leningrad Codex, or the BHS. That's how important that became. It's the basis for our Old Testament. Every Old Testament, I don't care what Bible you get, that is the text from which your Old Testament is translated from Hebrew into English. Okay? There are.
Is that come from Stuttgart, Germany?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's where it's housed. It's in the I want to say museum there in Stuttgart is where this the BHS is housed. Okay, this is important. Okay, let's not lose focus here. Okay, you remember when we talked about the Greek text, and we had the Byzantine family, and we had the Alexandrian family of Greek texts. And then they became the Greek, Textus Receptus. Okay, we'll go stay with that. That's the King James. Okay, okay. The Byzantine text would be like the Leningrad Codex, and then that becomes the Textus Receptus. It becomes the Greek text. Okay, now just the same thing happens with Hebrew. Okay, the Masoretic text, okay, is represented in what's called the Leningrad Codex. It's a copy of the Masoretic Old Testament. Okay.
Well, how does Leningrad figure in? Is that where Russia? Is that where it came from?
Yes, that's where it was, and that's where it's housed. I think right now is in Leningrad. Okay, but one thing I want you to keep in mind: the date. Okay, 1008 AD. That's going to be important as we move now into the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, and again, the BHS is pretty much the basic. What you're going to find. I read several introductions of Bibles this week. Okay, and they all said the same thing. The Old Testament is translated from the BHS. Okay, that's how important the work of the Masoretes were. Okay, now you got to remember this is long before the Dead Sea Scrolls are going to come along and shed even more light on our Old Testament. But for right now, all of our translations hold to the BHS as the standard for our Old Testament, Hebrew into English. Okay.
The Masoretes, a group of people who lived like the guys in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They lived Essenes who lived off to themselves. Were the Masoretes the same?
No, they weren't. They weren't. They actually lived, amongst themselves in communities in Europe.
Okay.
In Europe. And the beauty of their work is, like I said, I hate to just kind of like, I'm not trying to rush through it, but it's like there's so much there to understand of what they did. And I hope I'm just kind of whetting your appetite for some of these things, because it's just amazing. It's just amazing what God did as he guided and directed the Septuagint version, the Masoretic Text, into the Leningrad Codex that we now have, and now the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? Now the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you're saying, "Hey, Paul, you said you were going to give us a handout." Okay, I'll give you a handout. Here you go, hon. Would you like to hand those out?
You really want to hand them out already?
Yes, I know. Well, I trust these people. They're not going to be looking at all these nice colored pictures and everything, are they? There's more here, by the way. Yeah, it is. It's a very nice. You need more? I got plenty up here. So, okay, let's talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Pamphlets down.
Sorry.
Okay, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, again, because it is such a vast study, here's a few reference or resources that you can use if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, I hate to even start it because it's just so you can look at all the Indiana Jones and those things like that. This has got they got nothing on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, this is an amazing story. It really is. These are a few books that I would recommend. Let's start the one on the left, and I put it up there because it's usually a textbook in a lot of schools. It says at the bottom there, second edition. This just came out last month. So how up to date can you get? Well, you can't get much more up to date than that. Okay, the Archaeology of Qumran, and we'll talk about Qumran in a moment here, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, the one on the left is a good, what do they say, primer? Is that what they say about the Dead Sea Scrolls? You can learn a lot of it. Randall Price is a great scholar, a great archaeologist. As a matter of fact, he co-authored the book in the middle, the Zondervan Handbook on Biblical Archaeology, which deals with the Dead Sea Scrolls and all the other. If I was going to get one, that book in the center is probably a good one because it deals with all archaeology, and that just came out in 2017, so it's not that old. It's not that old. The one on the right, like I said, is kind of a good overview of the Dead Sea Scrolls, how they were discovered, and then after the discovery, what they found out from them. Okay, so just again, this is reference information for you. This is, if you're interested, take a screenshot of this or contact me, and I'll send you the link. Okay, I got an email from Rose Publishers. I'm on their mailing list, which is where, by the way, where this pamphlet came from. And they sent me an email with a link for this this 50-minute video, which is narrated by Dr. Randall Price. And it's really it's well done. It's really well documented. It just came out last year. Again, it's right up to date. It talks about some of the newer things that they've discovered. One thing I found out by viewing this is that there are a lot more caves. A lot more caves. I mean, I can't remember the number, and I don't want to give a number, but it's a tremendous amount of caves they haven't even gotten into yet to find out what's in them. The issue that they're dealing with now over there in the Middle East at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are at, is, I don't want to say grave robbers, because they're not grave robbers. They're scroll robbers. Okay, they're coming in, they're taking whatever they can, and then they're selling it on the black market. That's the biggest problem, and I heard it from several different individuals. Randall Price really brought this out, is that that's the biggest struggle that they're having with now at Qumran are scroll robbers that are going into these caves, busting open the jars that contain these scrolls, or taking them if they can get them out. Okay. And they're selling them on the black market for big dollars. Okay, so, anyways, he'll bring that out. He brings out a lot of the things that they've discovered just recently. He has actually been tagged by the Israeli. I don't even know which department it is in Israel that he actually works with at Qumran. In discovering the things at Qumran. But you can go to that link down at the bottom of the screen there and view the video. It'll also bring you to the Historical Faith Society, where there's some other things. It's all about archaeology, by the way, all about archaeology. So it's kind of.
Did the Romans kill off the colony at Qumran in 70 AD?
You know, hold yourself there.
Oh.
Hold yourself there, Gary.
Sorry
Don't
about that.
don't get a hold of me or ahead of me, okay?
Sorry about that.
Will there be a way to know if and when they ever get all of the Dead Sea Scrolls together?
I don't know. I mean, there's just like I said, there's just so much that has not been even looked at yet. And the thing of it is, when they discover these scrolls, it's not like, it's like they dig this up, and they just kind of can unroll it and start looking at it. It takes them so long just to unroll it, because you got to remember, how old are these scrolls? 2,000 years old, some of them.
They've been in damp caves.
And they've been in these caves. No, they've actually been in a very dry, you couldn't pick a better place and again, here, I see God's providence in this. You couldn't pick a better place for something like this to be done than this area of Qumran. Okay. Anyways, let me go on here. Okay. Questions? Nope. Good. Again, here we go. It's a brief overview of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. They are a collection of ancient documents that were discovered. Look at the discovery date. 75 years ago, 1946. That's when they were discovered. And they were in the region of the Judean Desert and near the Dead Sea. And I've got maps I'll show you in a moment here. It's in an area actually it's the West Bank area, and you'll see that. Okay. Look at the date. The scrolls date from as early as 300 BC to 65 AD. Okay, that's a pretty good range there. Okay, it's a pretty good range there. When were they discovered? 1946. How long have they been there? Some of them over 2,000 years. I don't know if you can get your head around it. I mean, every time I look at this, it's like I'm just. The Dead Sea Scrolls are considered the greatest literary and archaeological discovery of our times. I know that's probably not getting a whole lot of press, but it is. It is, and they are. They are. Okay. Quote from Dr. Price down at the bottom of the screen there. The scrolls are believed to be from the library of a group of first century Jews who separated themselves from the rest of society by living out in the desert at a site known as Qumran. Okay, just kind of a summary statement of what we're talking about here. Okay, so we have Qumran is the area that they're living in, and they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls because of where they were discovered. Okay, you know me in maps. You know I love my maps, and the two. Let's look at the one on the left first. Okay. This big overview here, you can see where Jerusalem is. It's almost due east of Jerusalem is Qumran, right at the top of the Dead Sea. Some of you, I think, have been over there and know this where you're at here. Okay, you can look down towards the bottom of the screen. You can see Masada. That's that was the final holdout of the Jews in 70 A.D. When Rome came in and basically, that was it. Israel was done as a nation after 70 A.D. Okay, on the right side of the screen is like a modern day map. Okay, and you can see in the big picture here, you can see where Qumran is at, where Jerusalem is at, and you can see that's the nation of Israel. By the way, I wish I could tell you what color it is, but help me out here. Green. Okay, that's a good color for it. Okay, the green is it red or orange?
West Bank is
Yeah.
orange.
Orange. Okay, so that's good. See, it's good. I'm just testing you folks on your colors. Make sure you're not as colorblind as I am. Okay. Let me wax political for only a moment because I think it's important for us to understand. The West Bank is the area, the area that is under attack today, that everyone in the world wants Israel. Israel won the West Bank area, okay, in one of the wars, I think in the 80s. I'll just leave it at that, okay? And now everyone wants them to give it back, okay? Well, Israel did something like that, and on the lower left-hand corner, they gave up the Gaza Strip. That's where the Gaza Strip is at, okay? And who did they give it over to? They gave it over to the PLO. And celebrations, right? We're going to have an election, okay? They had one election. And all the time that Gaza has been in that's the Palestine is what they call it, okay? One election, Hamas, the terrorist group Hamas won. They have never had an election since then. They never will. That's not going to happen, okay? Hamas runs the Gaza Strip. It's from the Gaza Strip that just a few months ago, the bazillion rockets that went into Israel, they all came from the Gaza Strip, okay? So Israel gave away some land, and look what happened, okay? And now there's this, this is the big thing. And again, I don't want to wax too political here because I could really go off here, but I'm trying to stay controlled, okay? If they give back the West Bank, look how much it's going to reduce Israel. That strip of land right here, that's about 10 miles wide, okay, between the West Bank and the Mediterranean Sea, okay? The goal of Hamas is to drive Israel into the sea. It's stated in their constitution that they're going to drive Israel into the sea. That's what they want to do, okay? Up at the top, just so we understand, because I think we hear these things and we don't, we think of West Bank and we think way out there. No, it's right next to Jordan. It's part of Israel. Up here is the Golan Heights. Again, Israel won that. President Trump actually said that, he doesn't have a problem with them keeping the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights are the mountains. If Israel gives up the Golan Heights, from there, anything, if whether it's going to be Jordan or Syria or Lebanon, if they set up missiles in the Golan Heights, they could reach Jerusalem in a moment. Okay, it's not that's not an issue. Yes, real
Does
quick.
most of the water originate in the Golan Heights?
Yeah, because it's mountains. It's mountains.
Well, Mount Hermon's up there, and it comes down into the Sea of
Yeah,
Galilee.
it comes down into the Sea of Galilee, and then it goes into the Jordan River, and then the Jordan River flows all the ways into the Dead Sea. Another story for another time, but the Jordan River is now being drained by Israel for agriculture and other things. That's why the Dead Sea is dropping feet every year, not inches, but feet every
Draining the
year.
Jordan?
The Dead Sea is going down.
I say that they're draining the Jordan?
They're tapping the river, the Jordan River, and they're using it for agriculture.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress. I know. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I got to move along here. Okay. Okay. How are they discovered? And a lot of this is documented in your thing. We'll just call him Muhammad the Wolf, okay, because that was his name. Okay, long story that's very short tonight, okay. He was a shepherd. He was a boy at the time. I don't know if he had the mustache, but he was tending the sheep like, they were Bedouin shepherds is what they were. He lost a sheep. He went looking for the sheep. He finds the caves along the Qumran there, down on the side. He thinks maybe the sheep went in there. He takes a rock. This is you can't make this stuff up, okay? He takes a rock, he throws it in that cave to either scare whatever's in there out or to try and see if his lamb or goat is in there. And he hears the shattering of pottery. And just like that, the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered. Just like that, okay? In an instant, 1946, that's when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was discovered by a shepherd. Of all people to find the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was a shepherd. Okay, more about the wolf here in a second, but this is the area of Qumran, and again, this is another story all to itself. Okay, down at the bottom is kind of an artist's rendering of what Qumran looked like at the time it was occupied. These are the ruins. A great archaeological dig is there. If you look at the very top of the screen there, where the cliffs go over, that's where the caves begin. That's not all of them. That's where they begin, and they go all along the edge of the Qumran plateau there. Okay, down into the valley there. Excuse me. The Qumran settlement is a story all to itself, and I just don't have time for it. I think Price in this little pamphlet that you have will talk about it some. But one thing I want you to understand is that the Essenes are the ones that lived there. That's the group. Okay, that's the group that lived there. And they lived there till around 68 AD, and that's when Rome came in. You have to remember, we are under rebellion. Israel has rebelled against Rome. Okay, they're going to kick Rome out of Israel. Well, how'd that pay off? Didn't really work out the way I think they wanted it to. Okay, by 68 AD, it's a full war. They come in. The Romans come in, basically kill everyone, or everyone that's there that could gets away. The Romans actually set up a garrison there at Qumran for a few years. And finally, they just deserted it. And it stayed that way for millennia, okay, until it was rediscovered. But the rendering down at the bottom kind of shows you what it may have looked like and how it was used and all that. I'm going to kind of move along here. How important is this statement? Well, I would say it kind of like summarizes everything we're talking about when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have a portion of every book of the Old Testament except Esther. Esther is the only book that we don't have that at least up to this point, that hasn't been discovered at Qumran and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, every other book, there's a portion of it has been discovered. Okay, why Esther? I don't know. You know, that's debatable, and we're not even going down that road tonight. Okay, but that's an important statement. Okay, and the pamphlet will bring that out. But that's an important statement. Every book of our Old Testament has been discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, I only want to give you a couple examples to kind of wrap this up tonight, and one of them is what's called the Isaiah Scroll. Okay, the Isaiah Scroll is just that. It's the entire book of Isaiah, from chapter 1 to chapter 66. Of course, they didn't have chapters in 100 BC or whatever, right? But they had the entire book is there. It is housed in what's called the Shrine of the Scroll, I think, the Museum of the Scroll in Jerusalem. This is the interior, what it looks like. This is actually a bomb-proof building. Gee, I wonder why. But that actually looks like the top of a scroll there. That actually goes down into the ground. Whenever there's going to be air raids and stuff like that. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, let's talk about the Isaiah scroll. Okay, and kind of follow along with me. We're going to blow through this quickly because I'm running out of time. The Isaiah scroll, it's also known as the Great Isaiah Scroll, was one of 7 Dead Sea Scrolls that were first discovered. So our Bedouin shepherd boy, okay, in 1946, where he found, of all things, he finds the Isaiah scroll, the whole scroll, okay, inside what became known as Cave 1. Okay, the scroll is written in Hebrew. It contains the entire book. Okay? How important is this? The entire book of Isaiah, from beginning to end, except for the damaged parts. It is damaged on the edges. You can see it. By the way, that is the scroll part of it anyway. You can see where it has some damage on it. Okay, it's the only Dead Sea Scroll that's preserved almost in its entirety. I didn't really realize this because I think, I read that last slide we saw, that we have portions of every book. Well, we do. It's portions of every book, not entire books. This Isaiah scroll is the pinnacle, okay? And for God in His providence preserved that for 2,000 years. Okay, we'll see the date here in a moment. Okay, 24 feet long, about 10.5 inches high. Okay, and rolled up. Okay. This almost gets funny, but it's really not. The Bedouin shepherds who discovered these scrolls, they sold this scroll and 3 others basically for pocket change. And they took it to Bethlehem to an antiques dealer, and the antiques dealer gave them basically pocket change for it. That was it. Okay, so the antique dealer thinks, oh, I can probably make a little bit more than that. So what does he do? Well, he takes the scroll and he sells it to the monastery. Actually, the archbishop. You're reading along with me. The archbishop of the monastery there in Jerusalem. Look at the astounding amount he got for him: $97.20 for this scroll. Okay, let's move along. Okay. And again, I'm trying to make this as fast as I can. Okay, this scroll, the Isaiah scroll, along with 3 others, finally make it to the U.S. It gets advertised in the Wall Street Journal. Okay, and finally, because it's been verified now, by the time this comes along, the scroll is bought anonymously for the state of Israel, and they paid $250,000 for it. Okay, this scroll is priceless. I mean, you can talk about millions and millions and millions. You could probably talk about billions. Okay. There's no price you can put on something like this. Okay. You can't put a price on something like this. You can't put a price on a story like this. Can you? Let me wrap this up. Okay. For 2,000 years, this Isaiah scroll lay hidden in the desert and near the Dead Sea. Okay. Look when it was written, and this is a conservative estimate. I've seen it dated a lot earlier than this, but 125 BC. When was it discovered? 1946 AD. Okay. Before, and here's where our Masoretic text comes into play. Before the discovery of this text, okay, the earliest that we had that was the Ben Asher Codex, okay, which is in Leningrad. That's the one that's dated to AD 1008. Okay. The Isaiah scroll from the Dead Seas is over 1,000 years earlier than that. And here's the thing about it. Okay. When you compare, well, actually, I have a note here. Let's go look here. Okay. Let me get to that, because we'll at least get through this tonight before I wrap up. I only have one other slide after this. Okay. When you compare, this is Dr. Price again, by the way. When you compare the Ben Asher Codex, 1008 AD, this scroll, the great Isaiah scroll from Qumran, okay, proves to be identical to the later version of Isaiah, 95% of the text. Okay. I don't know if you can get your head around this. Okay, we have a text from 1000 AD. We have a text from 125 BC, and they are identical. They are identical. The only thing that's changed is there's some spelling changes, but that's it. 95% of that's the beauty of what the Dead Sea Scrolls do for us. Okay? They verify God's word. They verify it. They show us that He is going to preserve His word, and He's going to preserve it forever. And that's what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kind of stop a minute over. And last week we went several minutes over, so I'm going to kind of stop here. I only have one other thing to show you in reference to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this will only take a few minutes. It's from the controversy of Psalm 22, verse 16, where they will, they're going to pierce. Because if you know Psalm 22, where it's the crucifixion is what we're talking about there, okay? And the idea of being pierced, okay? The Dead Sea Scrolls shed some light on that, and we'll get to that next week. We're gonna wrap this. It'll be two parts. It'll be about 10 minutes here to wrap up this Dead Sea Scrolls, and then we're going to move into our study on the King James only controversy. Okay, so I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. I know that, but check out the pamphlet. Over this week. It's not in depth, but there's a lot of information there, and hopefully it'll help you understand the Dead Sea Scrolls a little better and appreciate what God has given to us at this point in time.